So we'll get going. Thank you for joining this afternoon. At Necessary Services, we start each meeting with our mission, vision, and values. Our mission: connect people to the care, support, and opportunities that maximize their quality of life. Vision: a community where all people lead fulfilling lives. And our core values are people, integrity, trust. My name is Craig Menig. I'm the Member Relations Manager for Person-Centered Services, and I'm also a support decision-making facilitator and mentor through Support Decision Making of New York. Stella Dupree is our Member Relations Specialist. She is actually currently in training to become a facilitator for support decision making. What is supported decision making? Supported decision making is a process by which a formal agreement, a formal legal agreement is arrived at through a three-phase model developed by Support Decision Making of New York. Supported decision making helps people with intellectual and developmental disabilities receive support from trusted people to retain their legal and civil rights. We're going to talk today about formal supported decision making, which is recognized in New York state law. Legalized supported decision making is when an agreement is used through a process, the facilitation process, and must be recognized by third parties when the agreement is followed. Supported decision making is an alternative to guardianship. Guardianship can have an impact on people's rights to make their own decisions. The Constitution protects people by ensuring that they have the least restrictive alternative when someone is seeking guardianship. Since support decision making is fairly new, not a lot of courts and lawyers, attorneys know about support decision making as an alternative. Currently, support decision making in New York is spreading the word to lawyers and courts and people receiving services, families, and school districts, etc. Support decision making is available only to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in New York. Support decision making, the law is Article 82 of the Mental Hygiene Law. There's some important features of the law. It recognizes support decision making as a less restrictive alternative to guardianship, and therefore support decision making should be explored when somebody is seeking guardianship. The law requires that third parties recognize the supported decision making agreement when the agreement is arrived at through the facilitation process as set out by Support Decision Making of New York. There are some things that the law does not do, and that is that the law does not hold responsible the supporters when decisions are made by the decision maker. The law also helps to prevent discrimination against people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And it also ensures that people are protected from coercion and abuse. Supported decision-making New York approach. So, Supported Decision-Making of New York received a grant several years ago to develop the process by which supported decision-making agreements are arrived at. Supported decision-making of New York created a three-phase process, which we're going to go into later. There's an extensive training for facilitators to ensure that the process is very thoughtful and that the process of decision-making by the person receiving services is well understood. Each facilitator that is trained is paired with a mentor. The mentor and the facilitator really work in partnership. While the facilitator is doing the one-to-one and frontline work, it is the mentor and facilitators, they meet frequently to just discuss any obstacles that may arise or develop strategies for working with these decision maker. When someone goes to support a decision making of New York with the idea that they want to participate, they go through a process, which we'll also discuss toward the end of the presentation. But the assignment of a facilitator is done by a group of mentors who try to match facilitators with people based on their interests and sometimes geographic location, though geographic location is less of a concern these days with the how popular remote technologies are. Once a facilitator is assigned, the decision maker will be informed of that, and then there will be a meeting scheduled by the mentor, and the mentor, facilitator, and the decision maker will all meet and get to know one another a little bit and start planning what the facilitation process is going to look like for that person. It's important to understand that the decision maker really drives this process. So it's done at their convenience at times that they can meet, and length of times that they can also meet their needs. It's not uncommon for facilitators and decision makers to meet once a week for a half hour, every other week for a half hour. But the process is very slow and thoughtful, but can take quite a long time. The meetings are one-to-one. So that means a facilitator meets with the decision maker in person or one-to-one without anybody else there. That sometimes can be very difficult for supporters to understand, and it can be a little bit of an obstacle for supporters as they are very used to being in the room when discussions are occurring. That occurs very often with parents. When parents are exploring or going through the support decision-making process with their child, who may still be a child, they may be 16, 17 years old, when going through the process, they're used to being involved in all those discussions and meetings. When I say someone can go through the process at 16, 17, or even earlier, the support decision-making agreement cannot be signed until the person's 18 because it is a legal document. I'm going to check the chat quickly. Don't see any questions. Okay, so here's the three-phase facilitation model. Phase one is getting to know the decision maker. Part of that is also getting to understand the decision maker's process by which they currently make decisions and those supporters that are involved in those decisions currently. It's also to help identify other people in the person's life that may help them make decisions or potentially supporters for them in the future. This phase one, we'll get into all these steps, but that's also the beginning of planning out the support decision-making agreement. So phase two is called supporting the supporters, and that is really meeting with supporters, letting them know that they were chosen by the decision maker to be a supporter, then start talking about the preferences of the decision maker, and then ultimately starting to frame the support decision-making agreement. Phase three is negotiating the agreement, and ultimately you sign the support decision-making agreement. Phase one, as I said earlier, it's getting to know each other. The facilitator and decision maker really have to have a good relationship. It has to be a trusting relationship. So it's really important as a facilitator that when you go into the facilitation process that you help the decision maker understand that they are ultimately in control. That's something that can be very new to somebody in that position. So building trust with them is important, and making suggestions, supporting them, frankly, and making the decisions on scheduling is an important step for the facilitation process. Next, when you work with the decision maker in phase one, you're also going through some exercises, and these are things that were also developed by Supported Decision Making of New York, and it is really a written out exercise talking about decisions, big decisions that the decision maker has made or has been made on their behalf. Walking through those slowly helps to the decision maker to gradually get insight into their own decision making process. So next is the Big Four chart. The Big Four chart is really central in the whole facilitation process because it starts framing out what this support decision making agreement is going to look like. Here's an example of the Big Four chart. This isn't the entire chart. You can see over here on the left, there are topic areas. These are what we call which decisions the decision maker wants to help with, what types of support, who will support you, and how do you want to receive that support. So, for example, if we go to work, a decision maker may say, I want help around some of the decisions that I make about my work. So then we go over here and say, okay, what is the type of help that you want? Do you want help gathering information? All right. So that would, somebody may or may not want that. They may be perfectly capable of gathering information on options for work, but they also may want that. So just we go through each little step here, and sometimes you can even add a step. If there's a piece in here that's not identified on the form, it can be added. It's very common for decision makers initially to say, I want help in all these areas. But when you slow down and break it down for people, they begin to get a better understanding of what they're really doing and how much ability they have in some of these steps. So it's really important that things aren't always taken at face value, that we slow down and we really ensure that there's a good discussion around each step. Then, of course, there's who will support you. Very frequently, it's parents, other family members. Sometimes it's friends. I haven't encountered anybody who hasn't had any supporters at all yet, and that will be very challenging when you do. It is interesting and unfortunate. Many of the people that we provide supports to don't have others in their lives who are trusted that can help them make good decisions. And lastly, how do you want to receive that support? Is it a phone call? Is it a sit down around the table? Is it is it through remote technology? Is it going out to have coffee? Is it at my IDT meeting? What does that look like? So you can see how this will start to frame that support decision-making agreement. So identifying supporters is really critical. Again, usually the supporters are well known to the person, obviously, because they've typically been receiving support with those people already. So those are kind of existing relationships, and it's not that's the most common, I would say. Now, sometimes through the process, when we start breaking that down, I'll give you an example. There was, when we're talking about money and finance, with one decision maker, he kind of spoke up and said, well, gosh, I have an uncle that's a banker. Well, we hadn't identified his uncle as a supporter at all. But when we did reach out, the uncle was very happy to provide that support in money and finance. So again, that's why it's so important to go through things so slowly. Contacting the supporters. So once all the supporters are identified, then the facilitator and the decision maker work on how they're going to contact the supporters, whether it's going to be email, phone call, and who's going to do it. My experience has largely been that the decision maker will want me as a facilitator to reach out to supporters, although sometimes I've drafted emails with decision makers to say, all right, let's just you and I work on this together, make sure this is how you want it to look. I really want you to be the one whose name is on this. Okay, I'm going to read one question. So you can have a few supporters. Can they be individual for each section? Yes. Yes. In fact, not only each section, but each area. So if I have a supporter for work and let's say I want mom to help me gather information, but dad's a little bit better about helping me understand information, right? So that you break it down that much, or it can be broken down that much. Does that make sense? That's Teresa. Yes. Okay. You're welcome. So contacting the supporters and when we contact the supporters, that's also kind of scheduling a meeting, see what is going to work for them. When I help the decision maker schedule those meetings, we also want to frame out what this is going to look like. It's no fun showing up to a meeting and you don't know what you're going to get, right? So it's really good to say, hey, we're going to first meet. We're going to talk about the process that the decision maker went through so far, how the decision maker arrived at you as a supporter, and what areas of support this decision maker is expecting from you. So that's out front. So people know what they're getting. There's no surprises when they show up at a meeting. And then we meet. What's really important with decision makers and supporters is that you're restructuring that relationship a little bit. I probably don't have to tell anybody on this call that that's a very difficult transition to make, particularly when it's with perhaps a graduating senior, a person transitioning into adulthood. But it's also, I've also done facilitation with people who are adults and grown adults, and they're still receiving a great deal of support from their families. So repositioning from a position of making decisions for the person to supporting them is both incredibly important and sometimes very, very difficult. Some parents are already doing it. Some parents are just doing everything, in support with ensuring that they're not making the decision for their loved one. So with the supporters, we go through some decision making exercises, just like we did with the decision maker, and supporters can get a little put off by that, frankly, because they feel like they know how to make decisions. They've been making decisions their whole lives, but it's really important to go through those exercises for two reasons. One, it helps that repositioning I spoke about. It helps them understand what they're currently doing, perhaps, and what they should be doing as a supporter, right? Secondly, it's really important that we go through this whole process slowly, because we always have to remember that this is going to result in a legal document. So we want to be sure all the steps have been taken, and that this is a very thorough and well thought out process when by the time we arrive at this supported decision making agreement. So again, we pull out the big four chart again, go through that as our outline, and then there's kind of a negotiation period where the supporter will say, obviously, this is what I want, this is where I want it, this is how I want it. But the supporters can say, well, hold on, I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. I don't know if I'm the right person, perhaps, or it could be, I have more faith in you than you do yourself, and I think you could do that on your own. We could reframe the support perhaps a little bit, but maybe you could take a little more ownership on that step, right? So, so that's a process, and while it can sometimes feel frustrating to a supporter, I think once we get started through the process, people understand it and understand why it's so important, and frankly, it's very revealing to them. So, in a perfect world, you come to a consensus, and then move on to phase three. So again, there's that big four chart again. We go through the big four chart again. We've negotiated, so that then we start putting it into a draft form of the support decision making agreement. That's another time to review it, make sure everybody's comfortable with it, and then we draft the support decision-making agreement. Once that's drafted, it has to go to another a set of mentors that look at it, right? We have some very experienced mentors, many of whom were actually around at the creation of support decision-making in New York and were involved in the original pilot project and still are. So they take a close look at it, make sure everything's looking good, and then they send it to their legal team for a review. And then the legal team reviews it. If everything was looking good, it gets sent back. And there's the last step in this whole process. Well, arguably the last step is signing the support decision-making agreement. So drafts are sent to all the parties. We schedule. Of course, this is also at the preference of the decision maker, but scheduling a signing ceremony can be a big deal for people, and it can be something people don't want. So I asked the decision makers, okay, it's time to sign your support decision-making agreement. What do you want that to look like? Do you want a party? Do you want this to be a literal ceremony where people will attend and we'll do an ink signature, or do you want to just kind of send it out and have people sign it? And that's okay too. Some people just aren't comfortable with the ceremony type thing, but it is really something to celebrate. And it's kind of perhaps a rite of passage for some people, and just having that consensus and agreement and change in relationships can be a very positive step in someone's life. So, the future of support decision-making in New York State. So right now, I mentioned earlier that support decision-making in New York is funded by a grant. The grant was extended until September. So a request for proposals has been sent out or issued this week. I didn't actually see it, but I was told it was going to be sent out this week. And what that's going to do is allow private not-for-profits to bid and submit a plan for how they would run support decision-making. It's going to be a new organization. It's likely that current mentors, facilitators will transfer and contract with that new organization. And all in-process facilitations will move forward with that as well. What is not known is the funding stream. Right now, Now, it's grant funded, but what does that mean for the next step? Is it going to be a waiver program? Some people were saying maybe it could be part of self-direction. That doesn't seem likely. It seems like it's going in the direction of being waiver funded. So that remains to be seen, and I think that'll be part of the proposals that come out. And so that we should know something in the next couple of months about what support decision making will look like by next year. There are regulations that have currently been drafted and have taken a backseat to the New York State budget, as many of you know. And so they're sitting kind of in limbo, but they are finalized. And the regulations are for, OPWD services, particularly care coordination and providers, because this is going to impact providers, keeping in mind that surrogate decision making as a whole is a very broad topic, and very specific policies and procedures have been written around with language in it for surrogate decision making that does not include supported decision making. So it's likely that if you are a provider organization, certainly care coordination organizations, we're going to have to revamp a lot of our policies, procedures. We have SOPs to meet the new language of support decision making. There is training for care coordinators that is also is currently underway, currently being developed, I should say. I'm on the statewide committee for developing that training. It's a very good training. I'm just trying, I personally know the amount of training care coordinators have to go through. So we're trying to balance this training with just what you need to know, and a balance of the history and so on. Yeah, and I think care coordinators on the call can certainly attest to wanting something that just let me know what I need to do. Right. So that's what we're trying to do. We have another meeting about the training in about 3 weeks. But the team is just so good from Support Decision Making of New York. All their resources and training are incredibly impressive. So how do you get started? So if you go to Support Decision Making of New York website, which is sdmny.org, and it's on here, and I can put it in the chat if you like. Why don't I? Okay. You will find a form called a Getting Started form. And I can't really see this because it's really small for me, but I'll try. So the first step is you scan the barcode and you will attend an informational session. This session does not count as an informational session, although you'll hear a lot of the same things. Then you'll attend, if you're interested, obviously, the next step is to attend a sign-up session where you'll literally get on a list and wait for a facilitator. During that, you'll complete a sign-up form, obviously, and then you'll have some of the things we talked about earlier, which is you'll be matched with a facilitator, and then you'll do a meet and greet, and you'll meet the mentor and the facilitator, and then start the process that we discussed earlier. Here's the website again. They have a lot of great resources on there. I really encourage people to go there if you're interested. There's a lot of great stories and some good informational videos, forms, and other resources. Here's some frequently asked questions that I get. And again, please feel free to type a question in the chat. Is there a cost to me for facilitation? No, there's not. Not this time. I don't believe there ever will be. Again, I believe it's likely to become a waiver funded service at some point, but that's speculation. Maybe the state will come up with something new, but I don't anticipate any cost to anybody moving forward. And paid staff support. This is one I get a lot, and it's also kind of throwback to a question, to a statement I had earlier, which is many of the people that receive OPWDD services, particularly those that live in residences, may not have anybody else. So a staff member, a close staff member that knows the person well, can be a supporter. However, there are conflict of interest protections within every organization, and they would have to that would have to be applied, obviously. Teresa, what if they make a decision without my knowledge as a supporter? Well, can make that decision. There is no recourse. Okay, you're putting a couple in there. I'm going to get back to them, but there's no recourse for you as a supporter to go to somebody and say, hey, you can't accept that decision. Now, that being said, if it's made inconsistently with a supported decision-making agreement, which I believe is what you're getting at, then a third party could say, I'm not going to accept that decision if they knew that it was inconsistent with the agreement. If something happens to you or you're not available, can you have a backup? Absolutely, and that can be written into the plan, but it needs to be on the agreement. That's, again, I go back to that idea. That's why these have to be so well thought out and well structured. So you can do that. And oh, by the way, if I'm not available, then then why don't we consider this person? You're welcome. So I worked with adult decision makers who have concerns about their parents not being there for them anymore. And what I encourage people to do is act in the moment, understanding that backup's always a good idea, but things are going to change in people's lives, and the supported decision-making agreement can change as well. Okay, so if there's a change, then the agreement should be taken out and it should be looked at to make sure it's still relevant. And if supporters need to be added or removed, that can be done at any time. Okay. Is a facilitator part of the decision maker's circle of support or interdisciplinary team? That's up to the decision maker, though I would not encourage that because it is not the role of the facilitator to help with setting and achieving goals. There's a lot of emphasis during the training put on goal speak and not in getting out of the idea of goal speak. Anybody that's been in this field knows that we are trained to set goals and achieve goals. That's what we do. So becoming a facilitator for me was extremely enlightening and a little bit of a challenge because I had to get out of that mindset. So I've attended life plan meetings, IDT, COS meeting, at the request of a supporter to explain what they're doing and what they're going through. And I checked with my mentor prior to doing this. So just so you know, I with again with the permission of the decision maker, I said this decision maker has stated that he believes he can do this step in the process if he were to have more practice with it. So the circle of support then has that information. They, in this case, took that information and ran with it, which I was very pleased with, and started developing goals. Okay, well, we can do that, right? We have these opportunities. So that's about the extent of what I would recommend as a facilitator, being really part of the decision makers team, because there's a real balance there and a potential I don't know, conflict's the right word, but it's a tricky position to be in anyway. Are supporters legally responsible for decisions made by a decision maker under a supported decision making agreement? Teresa, I think you were getting to this maybe a little bit, and the answer is no. The person is making their decisions, right? They're being empowered to make their decisions. Part of that empowerment and freedom, if you will, is facing consequences when you make bad decisions. A supporter can provide great information and guidance to the decision maker, but ultimately the decision maker is going to make that decision on their own in the moment, right? So after all the support is done, taking place, the decision maker has all the information they need. Now they're going to make the decision. They make it, it's on them. Okay, not legally responsible supporters. Okay, so one of the things I don't get this so much early on, but I've had parents come to me and say, I'm interested in facilitation for my child who's going to be graduating soon, and they really need someone to sit down with them and help them make decisions. Well, that's not the case. That's not what we do. As tempting as that can be sometimes, because you do have thoughts. Believe me, I mean, we're people, and but no, it's really to facilitate the process for them, to help them come to an understanding of their own decision making, and let the agreement play that part. Let's see. I'm going to read another question. During the initial setup, is there a process that determines if supported decision making is not a good fit for an individual and other options provided like legal guardianship? Okay. This is pie in the sky, and I'm an idealist, but I believe anybody is appropriate for support decision making if the support is good. That being said, I'm not knocking legal guardianship. I think legal guardianship can be very appropriate in certain circumstances, in many circumstances. However, so if someone starts going down the road of supported decision making, they sign up, they go to an information session, they get matched with a facilitator, we start going down the track, and it's just not working. We're just We're just not clicking. And it's not just about clicking, it's about gaining momentum, right? So we don't feel like we're making movement. Well, it doesn't just end there. We don't say, no, this isn't a good fit. It goes back, like the facilitator will go back to the mentor. The mentor may call in other mentors. We have group mentorship meetings. And we're problem. So how do you figure this out? Is there a different approach? Is there a way to make this successful? So there's a lot of effort put into trying to make them successful, but not all are, right? We know. So a person can just say, I don't want that anymore during the process, right? But we've had interesting. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Naomi Brickle, but she's one of the leaders, perhaps the leader of sport decision making in New York, and and I'm not speaking out of turn. She spoke with us publicly at a conference just recently. But her daughter was involved in supported decision making. She was getting facilitation, and she just stopped. She said, I don't want to do that. And obviously Naomi was a little bit shocked and perhaps offended, but that's her decision, right? So yeah, the process can stop at any time, switch gears. People that are currently in guardianship can also explore sport decision making. Okay, there are circumstances, and they're becoming more common, where an adult with a guardian identifies that they don't believe they need a guardian. And sometimes the guardians are in complete agreement with that. Not always. But I've advised some care coordinators, you can start the process. And if the person really wants to dissolve their guardianship, what a great tool to go to the court with, to say, this was not available when I received a guardian. I want to explore this. I believe it's right for me. It's my belief that the court would look at that and go, that's a good option. I see you're serious about this. There is an alternative. Oh, okay. I didn't get you, Tom. I didn't even read your question yet, but I guess I answered it. Yeah. So I answered part of your question, but anyway, yes. I believe it's a good tool anyway, right? Regardless of whether it ends up with an agreement, the whole process of learning about oneself is good. Let me just read the rest of your question here, Tom. Are there any examples where someone transitioned? Yes. Okay. If yes, do you know in general terms what's required by surrogate's court? I don't know. I'm not a guardianship expert. I don't know that I'm even a sport decision making expert. I think I'm getting to be. But I would say that I would believe that starting the sport decision making facilitation process would be seen in a positive light by a court. So, yeah. Okay. So, if you need more information on this topic, you can reach out to me. Here's my email address, cmenning@personcenterservices.com. You can give me a call. We also have a member relations mailbox, which is at the bottom of the page there. If you are with a provider, I've spoken to many provider groups, especially clinical groups, because surrogate decision making is certainly a hot topic. I'd be happy to come to a presentation similar to this with any team or any group. If you're with a self-advocacy group, a parent group, I thought I saw a couple school employees that were on today. So if you'd like me to come talk to your school group, I'd be glad to do that as well. Okay, Richard has put a question in the chat. Identifying supporters, would that be me, the father, the mother? Yeah. The supporters are identified by the decision maker through the facilitation process. That's what the part of the process is the decision maker identifying those supporters. Does that make sense, Richard? Okay, Richard, if you have more questions, please feel free to call me. Take down my number. I'd be glad to have a discussion on it. Sounds like you have a very specific situation that you'd like to discuss, and I'm willing to do that with anyone else too. I think we all have such different circumstances. Sometimes it's very good to. Okay, thumbs up. Was that? Okay, Alicia, that was you. Okay, there is something I want to go a little bit further into with care coordination, only because the training is coming out, and the some of the responsibilities of the care coordinators. One responsibility is going to be to ensure that the sport decision making agreement is reviewed every year. Oh, good questions. Okay. Yes, I agree. Good questions. So just something for our care coordination team members to be aware of. It's on the horizon. But if you have somebody with a sport decision making agreement, should be available in our EMR, because it may have to be produced. So it has to be stored somewhere accessible, and and it will be reviewed. And when I say reviewed, a cursory review to make sure that it's still relevant. And if it's not still current and relevant, you go back to sport decision making of New York or the next organization that takes over to provide facilitation for the changes, right? Not a brand new facilitation, but just to go over the document and identify new supporters and the structure. So care coordinators can expect that. So last thing, if there's no more questions, and I'll still keep an eye out. If you could, please scan this QR code and fill out this survey. I appreciate everybody's attendance. I'm going to hang on here for a little bit longer. So if you'd like to, Teresa, I'll answer that. So if you'd like to stick around and put more questions in the chat, I'd be happy to answer. Thanks, everyone. So Teresa, yes, yes, you would, if you believe there was going to be resistance from the institution about accepting the decision of the decision maker, right? And that goes. I think it's important to say, because I think financial institutions are one area that is kind of high profile, if you will, and there's another is medical decisions. Medical providers. I mean, I've had a lot of personal experience in getting medical providers to accept a decision of a person with an intellectual or developmental disability. So yes, having that. Again, remember, this is a thing it's new to people. So if you go to a hospital, for example, or a bank or whatever that looks like, they may not know anything about it. So they may have to run it, by their legal team or whatever that looks like. But I think it's also important to understand that really the only reason that a decision shouldn't be accepted by a third party under the agreement is if there's some reason to believe that coercion or abuse is happening, right, in that relationship. So if that's the belief, then people can slow that process down to ensure that everything's good.